Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday on Tuesday, where we kick off each week by doing what IU fans love more than anything else, talking hoops. IU hoops, Big Ten hoops, deep dives into basketball strategy and concepts. We do it all here every Monday, and we're happy to have you here with us. I'm your host, Jared Morris. This is the 10th edition of Banner Monday, and it is our 464th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the afternoon of Tuesday, January 8th, 2018. So yes, this is Banner Monday on Tuesday. But let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call.
I got to say, it's great branding.
It was maybe an ill-advised decision to name it after a day, because it gives us very little flexibility if we ever have to reschedule it. So it's a lesson for the future.
You know, we kind of fly by the seat of our pants here at the Assembly Call. I'll just let you guys in on a little secret there.
Yes. All right, so here's our Hoosier Proud banner moment for this week. So this week's banner moment occurred to me while I was listening to Monday's edition of the Moving Screen podcast, which is a show about Michigan and Michigan State hoops that's hosted by two of my favorite Big Ten writers, Brendan Quinn of The Athletic and Dylan Burkhart of Hoops. So shout out to those guys. But in reflecting on Michigan's victory over Indiana, both Brendan and Dylan agreed that the fight Indiana showed in battling back from the early deficit was impressive, especially as compared to previous Michigan games against good competition this season. And I think that context is important as we assess what we saw on Sunday. The Wolverines annihilated Villanova early in the season, and the Wildcats barely mustered a whimper all game long. Michigan beat North Carolina by 17 in the Big Ten ACC Challenge, thanks to a dominant 30-12 stretch to start the second half, which the Tar Heels never recovered from and basically folded after. And Michigan thrashed Purdue using a similar game-opening blitzkrieg to what we saw Sunday. Michigan led 30-16 after the first 10 minutes of that game, and Purdue would proceed to lose every 10-minute segment thereafter, finally falling 76-57. And yet our Hoosiers, playing without their starting point guard and backup center, not to mention Jake Forrester, Jerome Hunter, and Race Thompson too, and with Zach McRoberts at about 60% because of his back injury, took a 30-13 haymaker within the game's first 9 minutes, but never stopped fighting. Unlike Villanova, North Carolina, and Purdue, Indiana found a way to bounce back from the big blow delivered by Michigan to get the game within 7 points at one point in the second half. The Hoosiers actually outscored Michigan by 6 points over the final 30 minutes of the game. That was worth feeling good about right after the game, but I feel even better about it considering how other highly regarded teams have wilted in the face of previous Michigan onslaughts. Now, understand, I'm not claiming it as a moral victory. Archie Miller has made it clear he has no use for moral victories, and 30 minutes of better basketball doesn't erase the 10 minutes of horrendous basketball that preceded it. But with the Archie Miller era still in its infancy, these kinds of positive signs, even within double-digit losses, are worth noting. Once Archie's Hoosiers actually start fighting in a game, they don't stop. They finish games strong. Now we just have to get our fight going earlier in games. And if we learn how to do that, this team will be capable of doing some damage in February and March. All right, joining me for this week's Mailbag, you already heard his voice. He's a columnist for The Big Lead, a co-host of The Hangover, and he may soon be in the running to be USC's new offensive coordinator.
What's going on there?
He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, anything to rant about today?
I don't think I want that job at this point, really. Let's be honest. Although I guess apparently if you sign up, no matter what your track record is, if you sign up as USC's offensive coordinator, you'll get offered NFL head coaching jobs, regardless of what your track record is. So
it's a ridiculous story. It really is.
Continue failing upward, Cliff Kingsbury. Woo! He's like the new Lane Kiffin. I don't know. Anyway, I agree with you on the fight that Indiana showed. It doesn't make me feel, I would say, it doesn't make me feel good about that game, but it certainly makes me see the brighter side of the coin. I mean, it's, there are positives you can take from a loss, and that's certainly a positive. And we've seen, though, over the last 2 years, Archie Miller's teams have fought. I mean, there's no question about that. The Hoosiers under Archie Miller do not stop playing, and they do not stop fighting. And even against Duke this year, they were still playing hard. They were just outmanned. And so it is a positive to see that. You're right. We got to get these starts under control, though. I mean, because it's been consistent. It hasn't just been against good teams. It's been consistent that they start slowly. So that's something they have to work on. I'm sure Archie's aware of that. I'm sure everybody on the team is aware of that. And I'm sure
he's made that quite clear in his postgame comments on his radio show.
Yeah. And I'm sure that it's one of those things where even the players are just like, I don't know what it is. Like, we don't know what it is, but you've got to unlock whatever is going on there. And we talked about it in the post-game show. If you guys want to go back and listen to what our solutions were. And I think simplifying the offense is number one. Just get it to Juwan Morgan and let him work. But even against Michigan, Juwan Morgan, one of his first 7. So you're not going to win on the road. I mean, I know he wound up having a great game, but you're not going to win on the road when your star players don't step up early and put pressure on the opponent, and especially against a good team. So, yeah, I think it's just something they've got to figure out, and it's their bugaboo right now. And really, if you look at what Indiana has done, other than free throw shooting, which has gotten under control over the last couple of weeks, and maybe you'd like to have some guys hitting some more threes, the only complaint you have about this team is the starts. I mean, everything else they're doing pretty well, and maybe not they're not like excelling and dominating, but they're doing pretty well and looking like they're improving. So the slow starts are really the one thing that's kind of hanging on this team and needs to get better.
All right, so on tap for today, Ryan and I are going to answer some of your questions, and then we're going to take a look at IU and around the Big Ten with Mike de Courcey as we do. Now, we already did Basketball 201 with Ben Ladner, so if you're watching this live, the replay is already in the YouTube feed. If you're listening on the podcast, that audio will be in segment 3 here, just like it always is. And then at the end of the show, I will preview IU Maryland. All of that coming this week on Banner Monday. Before we get to that, just a quick reminder that when you need IU basketball tickets, use the URL iutickets.shop. Go to SeatGeek. You will find the best values on IU tickets there, whether you want to go see a game in a road venue, see a game at Simon Scott Assembly Hall. And when you use that URL, iutickets.shop, you help out the show as well. So iutickets.shop, whenever you need tickets, not just to basketball games, but concerts, anything, USC football games, if that's your thing, anything. Anything that you want to see, go to SeatGeek and use that URL, iutickets.shop. All right, Ryan, let's hit up some questions here. So the first question is from Tom. We probably got this in 8,000 different versions. Will Rob be able to start the next game? We do not know. There has been nothing official. I didn't see Archie really say anything about it on his radio show. There is a media availability on Thursday. That's when I would expect to have an answer to this. Otherwise, we just don't know.
Yep. I mean, that's all. I mean, especially with medical stuff, they're not going to tell us until it's all settled. I mean, they really, Indiana has shown that over the years. They don't release any medical information. They will update injuries usually before games, and that's it.
Yep.
And it'll usually be like, this guy can play, not like what's wrong with him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's another question that we've gotten. This is from Scott. So he says, what is the deal with IU's concussion protocol? I like that we're being extra cautious with these kids' brains, but I'm starting to really believe that during practice they're playing bowling ball, dodgeball, instead of getting their free throw reps in. Obviously, Scott being a little bit sarcastic there. But we have gotten a lot of comments about this. Some very supportive, a few, kind of sarcastic, and a few that kind of almost seem accusatory, like Indiana's doing something they shouldn't do and keeping these kids from playing, because NFL players used to come back after a week. And so I actually went today and read the concussion protocol, and there are a couple of things that are in there that I just want to read real quick, Ryan, and then I'll get your take on this, and then I want to kind of put this issue to bed, because I don't want to keep talking about it, but there's still a narrative out there that I want to combat. Number one, you can go to assemblycall.com/concussion. That will redirect you to Indiana's official concussion protocol. They follow the NCAA standards. If you go to that URL, you can read the whole thing yourself and get some questions answered. A few quotes. It follows the direction and guidelines of the NCAA's Concussion Safety Protocol Committee and is compliant with a concussion management plan recommended by the committee. Okay, so Indiana is doing what the NCAA recommends. The duration it takes to return to activity is completely individualized to the particular student athlete and is not based on any arbitrary time frame. In addition to that, this progression can take anywhere from days to weeks, and the speed with which the athlete moves through this progression is dependent on multiple factors, and they list a lot of factors. It can be, the presence of ADHD, the presence of drug and alcohol abuse, the presence of, other memory issues that you've had, family history, illnesses, on and on and on. There are a lot of different things that could contribute to how quickly or slowly a player moves through the protocol. And then finally, it is essential that the athlete is completely asymptomatic before any final clearance for return to play. So every player takes a baseline test. Once they even think that there's a concussion, they will then perform a series of tests, including that baseline test, to see where the player is. All right, they have to fully pass that, and then they start kind of stepping up physical activity, and they might, jog for 15 minutes. And if they can do that without headaches, then they'll move on to the next thing, all the way up to actually being able to do, full contact for whatever that sport is, and they have to be totally asymptomatic. And then often a new baseline test will be taken some period of time later to see if it's changed based on the previous concussion. So I just want to lay all that out there. That is what they are doing. Indiana is not, and I talked, spoke with some sources inside the program. Indiana is not doing anything, outside of what is normal and what the NCAA does. They're following this protocol, which is exactly what they should be doing. And that's what's going to have to happen. Until they are asymptomatic, they are not going to be back on the court. That's exactly how it should be. And I'd even be fine if they were like, let's just wait until a week after they're asymptomatic just to be safe. If that's what they wanted to do, I'd be fine with that. Not saying that they are. I'm just saying I would err on the side of caution myself.
It's worth noting on the Race Thompson thing. I think it was reported that his sister had serious concussion issues, and you listed family history as one of the things, and that might be he might have to pass the test at a higher threshold or something, because of that. So it's, again, worth noting everything here. These people want these kids on the court. Like, the idea that like they're holding them out for some reason. No, these people want these kids on the court. They root for these kids. They hope these kids, but they're also going to be strict on this stuff because they care about these kids as well. And people who talk about the NFL has had a long history of ignoring concussions and ignoring the importance of head injuries and all of that stuff. So let's not use them as the baseline for anything. And the NFL knew for decades what concussions did to your brain and hid the information and all of that stuff. So let's not use them as the example of how to do anything right, because they don't do anything right, frankly. Except for
and I do understand, Jamie makes a good point in the chat. He says, never remember seeing college basketball team with 2 players out. Agree. Like, it's kind of unprecedented territory. Number one, because these were kind of unique injuries. I mean, you saw what happened to Rob when he took the knee to the head. And from everything I've heard about what happened to Race, that was a violent collision that happened in practice. So, that's going to create those issues. And people are a lot more cautious. We know more about it now, so it's taken more seriously. So you can't really base this based on the context of the past.
Or history, yeah.
Yeah, based on the history. And as Archie said, it was either in his post-game press conference or his radio show, he can't really remember this, just this crazy amount of injuries. It's just, this team's just kind of snake-bitten right now, and we all just need to, kind of get through it and realize it's kind of an anomalous thing. But we'll probably start to see more guys out for longer period of time with concussions, which is how it should be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, it's new territory. That's the reason why you've never seen the team with 2 guys out with concussions, because it's just they're handling them differently now. And by the way, teams, from what I understand, teams don't have to follow the NCAA guidelines, and so they may be playing players with concussions. Indiana's doing the right thing by following those guidelines.
Yes, they are. Okay, let's get into some, and hopefully that's the last we have to talk about this until Rob and Race come back, and we can just refer people back to this episode, but I wanted to hit it one more time because we did get a lot of questions on it. Okay, Jane asks the other most obvious question: how is the coaching staff going to eliminate slow starts? We talked about this some on the post-game show. The one word that Archie Miller has brought up since we talked about that, Ryan, is toughness, and he said he just doesn't think the team is very tough coming out. We talked about some of the things offensively that we think they should do. One other point that we brought up in the Michigan game, and I agree, I didn't think they were very tough defensively. And actually, when Ben and I went over some clips from how they played defense early, guys weren't really in stances. They weren't fighting through screens. It was kind of like they were easing their way into the game. You ease your way into the game against Michigan, they're going to blitz you, which is exactly what happened. Then we watch clips from the second half and late in the first half. Guys are in stances. They're fighting through screens. They look totally different. And so
they came out flat. I mean, that's there wasn't intensity. Yeah.
And that is toughness. That's coming right out and being ready to go, from the beginning, mental and physical toughness. So I think part of that will get better when you have more depth. Because, again, guys playing 35, 36, 37 minutes, there's probably a natural tendency to coast a little bit early because you may be trying to save some because you're going to have to play the whole game. So knowing that you have some depth you can trust behind you. But then I think the other thing is just guys like Juwan Morgan and the leaders on the team taking it upon themselves to set that example from the tip. It's not complicated. Agreed. It's just going to have to be a mental shift, really, that these guys make. And maybe there's a few, tactical things you can do offensively to, get some more buckets that help get you more pep in your step. But a lot of it's going to be on the defensive end too. And that it's an adjustment the guys are going to have to make, and it's going to have to start with the leaders. And it's not necessarily to criticize the leaders. It's just the reality that those kind of tones are set by your leaders.
Agreed.
And your experienced guys, and they have to do it.
And Romeo's a freshman, but he's a leader. He's got to be a leader, and he's got to be a guy who sets an example. And that's tough on a freshman. It is. I don't care if you're a 5-star or a 1-star. You come in, and you're the one of the leading scorers, and you're who you are. You're Romeo Langford. You've got to set the tone as well. And it's
like he did against Marquette. Remember his defense early in the Marquette
mm-hmm.
game?
But it's, guys look to you, and guys, or even guys who are older than you look to you to do some things. And I would say that Juwan Morgan, again, another guy who we love Juwan. He wound up having a great game, but the way you start the game sets a tone, especially when you're playing a top team on the road. You've got to come out and set that tone early, and they didn't, and they almost got run off the floor, and then obviously they locked in, and it was almost like they're not warmed up enough going into games or something, because you're right, they're stiff. They don't, the intensity isn't there. So I would say, yeah, something's got to give there, and I think that you've got to look to the leaders. I think it's also worth noting, and we've mentioned this a few times this year, and it doesn't seem like it because Juwan Morgan it plays such a prominent role, but this is a very young team, and they make young team mistakes at times, and it's a young and inexperienced team, I would say. And again, when you make those kind of mistakes consistently, you look at it and you say, well, yeah, I mean, young team on the road against a top team, that's what happens. But we're so reliant on a senior that it maybe gets lost that this is, they're clearly a veteran team. No, it's not. And Juwan Morgan really has to make up for a lot. And I mean, that's unfortunate to put that much on him, but that's what has to happen.
Your senior superstar captain always faces an unfair burden. Like it's
Agreed.
just it's the territory, and it's actually a compliment to Juwan. Like in a weird way, it's a compliment that he gets criticized for some of those things, because it's like that's just what the expectations are.
He's set his own expectations so high with some of his performances that, I mean, he took the team on his back against Butler and was unbelievable. And when you do that, it's okay, well, I guess that's what we're expecting now. And you're not going to get that every game, but you expect to rely on that guy in big games.
Yep. Okay. This next question will go to you first with an answer here, Ryan. This is from Tim. Why has Evan Fitzner,
San Diego guy,
seemingly regressed so dramatically? Is it because the Marquette game was an anomaly that was never really reflective of his talent, or is there something about the, quote, Miller system that makes Evan or any three-point specialist a bad fit? Do you see the potential for it improving, or should we consider Evan's eagerly anticipated contributions a write-off for the remainder of the season? I know what I think about this. What do you think?
I'm not sure. I've always felt about Fitzner that he was a guy who maybe one game every couple would have like a really nice game, and maybe in February we're going to see him go off for 20 against somebody and then not hear from him for a few games and then have him go off for 20 again. The problem is that he was relied upon as a shooter pretty much primarily, and teams are overplaying his three-point shot. And the fact that he's 6'10", he should still be able to get that shot off, but I feel like his confidence is just shot right now. And when you're not offering a ton defensively, he offers some length, but you're not offering a ton. And a guy like Deron Davis is playing well when he's in there. I think it's tough to find minutes. And I think Archie would rather have the speed of some of the smaller players and then have Fitzner out there. They do need to get him in rhythm, though, because they need somebody who can stretch the floor. And Fitzner can do that. And I just think his confidence is shot right now, because you watch him early in the year, you watch him in the preseason, dude can shoot it. He really can. And he really hasn't gotten any opportunities lately. I think he's a perfect candidate to do some pick and pop stuff, but his teammates have to have confidence in him too, to give him that, to give him that pass. And I think that if you set him up at the top of the screen with, at the top of the key with, Rob or Devontae Green or Juwan Morgan or somebody, and just do some pick and pop stuff, I think you can get him some open looks. The key is he's got to knock him down. And whatever's going on with him, he needs to fall out of that funk, because we're going to need a three-point shooter at some point this year. I didn't think, as people talked about him coming in, I did not think he was going to be Max Bielfeldt. But I thought that, hey, tall guy who can shoot, that can help you. And I'd like to see them work the way they have with Justin Smith to kind of get him some confidence and get him to a baseline point where he can at least contribute something every game. Truly
a professional job. They were fighting through a yawn and a hiccup within one answer. That was,
yeah, I know.
That That was great stuff.
It's earlier out here, my friend.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. Archie said, I think it was in the post-game press conference, like maybe we've got to do some stuff to get Evan a shot early, get his confidence going. And I agree. Like I just think, Indiana doesn't have enough guys right now that are penetrating and creating and drawing the defense to get Evan a lot of open looks. And maybe as the ball's in Romeo's hands more, he can start to do some more of that. And when you get Rob in there,
Romeo would be great.
Yeah,
and everybody
Evan
follows Romeo when he drives.
Yeah, and Evan was doing a little bit better when Rob was in there too. So I think as you get some of that going, that'll help. But we did say he's probably a guy that's going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 like really big games in the Big Ten and help you win them, but might also disappear for others because the matchups aren't going to be good. That's still generally how I think. Again, I think we've got to weather this tough stretch in January, but I still think he's a guy that February and March can be an important player and is going to help win Indiana some games when we need some shooting. So I understand the frustrations, and he does, coaching staff does, but I think we need to be a little bit patient with him because I think he'll really benefit also from Indiana getting more of its guys back so he can play more in the role where he's supposed to play.
Well, and the perfect spot for him right now, if they're not doing pick and pop stuff, is to have he and Deron Davis on the floor at the same time where the double has to, when you force it, you set up the offense so the double has to come from him, and Deron can find, when you throw it into Deron, because Deron's drawing so much attention when he isn't, even though he's playing limited minutes, when he's in there, they're often doubling him, and because he's so good on the block. And if you do that and you set it up so Evan's guy has to double, then you get your open looks. And, but again, that's kind of tough to do because then you got two big guys who aren't exactly fleet of foot defensively out there. And where Archie's going to default to, and he's going to default to defense, and he's always done that. And he should. And that's his bread and butter. And that's what this team has improved so much on, is defensively.
All right, Ryan. This next question is from IUDSW. This is a guy that we haven't seen a lot, so it's fun every now and then to reflect on and remember what he hopefully will bring to the table when he comes back. Is Jerome Hunter considered a, quote, scorer? I hate to look ahead, but where will points come from next year without Juwan and presumably Romeo? Trace Jackson Davis has post ability, but who will be able to score consistently? So you do want to give us a quick recap of your Jerome Hunter scouting report? Because unfortunately, we can't really update it too much since then.
Yeah. Jerome is a guy who's really good off the bounce. He is a natural scorer, but he's also very efficient. Like, he's not going to take a bad shot. He almost never takes bad. I'm sure that next year, I'm assuming he doesn't play till next year. I'm sure that next year as a freshman, he'll take some bad shots because that's what freshmen do. But he's a guy who can score off the bounce, who is he understands the game really well, which impressed me because he's not a guy who's played basketball his entire life. And he's just a guy who understands the flow of the game. He knows when he brings the ball, and whenever he was bringing the ball up in high school, he knew when to pull up, when to pass, when to drive and pull up, and drive and kick, all that stuff. He just had a really great innate sense of basketball. And I was really looking forward to seeing him this year. Now, next year, is he going to replace Romeo? No, of course not. Romeo is an all-everything guy. But I think Jerome is the guy who can fill that role. Again, not to Romeo's level, but I think he can fill that role on the offense. And then you get Trace Jackson Davis, and it's going to be a different offense next year. It's just going to look different. And because of the different makeup of the players, but you've got Trace Jackson Davis. Then you've got, dare I say, Keon Brooks, another guy who can slash and shoot and do some different things. You get him out there. You get Rob Finnessy. You get Race Thompson. You get, so next year, I've been saying it for a while, and people were questioning it and thinking I'm crazy, but I've been saying I think next year's team may actually be better than this year's team. Now, will we have an individual as good as Romeo Langford or an individual as good as Juwan Morgan? Maybe not, but the collective talent of the team is going to be higher. I think there's no question about that, because you lose Juwan Morgan, you lose Zach McRoberts, you lose Romeo, but you've got the 5 freshmen from this year getting a year older. You've got hopefully Devontae Green taking another step. You've got, Deron Davis being healthy and being able to dominate on the block. And then you've got this next recruiting class coming in. And that's what the goal of your program is. And I feel like there's been fits and starts with Indiana where you've had a great team and then everybody leaves and it's a big drop off. The goal is to have waves of guys coming so that every year you've got a baseline of program players who are there for 3-4 years. And then you've got these waves of talent coming that improve it every time. And it's instead of just being a wave and a crash. It's just a constant kind of flow of talent into the program. That's the goal, and that's what we're going to have next year. Now, does that happen again in 2020, 2021? I don't know, but the way the program is set up right now, everything is flowing in that direction. So that's why I think that next year will be a more talented team, and I think could be a better team, because it's also going to be more, I feel, balanced and not as reliant on two guys as it is with Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan. I think it'll be a more balanced attack. As for Jerome Hunter, yes, I think that he's a guy who can score, and he can definitely do some stuff off the dribble. Obviously, we haven't seen it at the college level, so I don't know how it's going to translate right away, but he's a guy that I had very high hopes for. I thought, watching his junior film and then watching the beginning of his senior year, I thought he was a guy who could creep up into the 5-star territory. He was a 4-star. I think he was, like 50th in the nation or around there, like middle of the top 100. And I thought easily he could have creeped up into the back of that 5-star category because of just what he can do on the court. But his competition wasn't as great as some of the other top recruits. So I think that hurt him a little bit.
You mentioned the balance scoring. I would just say balance scoring isn't always better, and that's going to be a big challenge.
No.
But the other thing is,
you know what I mean, though.
No, I do. You know, the
different guys can step up every game, you know.
And that discussion is also different now because, we look at this year. I mean, if next year's team is just healthy, like, they might end up being better than this year, because this year's team has become so reliant on those two guys because Jerome's out, Rob's out. So many guys are injured. Like, it's just, it's just kind of how things have gone. So
for sure. No, and when I say balance scoring, I just mean that there's more guys who can do things for you. You might have a guy like Trace Jackson Davis scoring 20 a game. I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm just saying you might have a guy like he or Keon Brooks being your leading scorer by a lot, or, those two guys scoring more than everybody else. But I do feel like there's going to be more guys who can do things for you next year than there are this year. And that's not a knock on this year's team, because this year's team is good. It's just a different way of being good than when a lot of guys can attack. And that when a lot of guys can attack, it puts so much pressure on defenses. But Juwan Morgan and Romeo Langford also put a ton of pressure on defenses. So I just think it's a different type of makeup that may actually wind up being better in Archie Miller's system.
Yeah, whereas this year you have, two guys averaging 18, 19 a game and really no one else over 7 or 8. Yeah. Next year your leading scorer could have 13 points, but you might have 4 guys in double digits. It could be something like that.
Right.
But
in
alas,
any one game, a couple of those guys could go for 20, and 25 or whatever. But yeah, as you said, it's a different style of team, clearly on the horizon, but I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing.
All right, Ryan, I know you have a radio spot to go do with Kent Sterling. Any profound final thoughts before we bid you adieu?
Tune into Kent Sterling show. And,
no, don't tune into Kent Sterling show. We got Mike de Courcey coming on.
I got a half hour. You got a half hour to finish. It's at 4:00 Eastern, 1:00 Pacific. For all you Pacific folks listening in, I'm sure there's a ton of you. On CBS 1430 with Kent Sterling. I'll be there. Cool. Oh, and thebiglead.com. We have a ton of championship game recap today. It's all very good. I have to say. I think
this audience loves Clemson and Alabama football. Let me tell you.
Yeah, but you know what? There's some making fun of Clemson and Alabama football that you will enjoy. Like the video of the fake field goal last night, in which Nick Saban decided to have his freshman walk-on kicker as the lead blocker, which was into Clemson's starting defensive line, not even their special teams group. So yeah, that was fun to watch.
It's a play that horrendous. That's what it takes to second guess Nick Saban, is a play that horrendous.
Yeah,
that was
pretty bad. As bad as it gets.
Okay. All right, coming up on the Assembly Call, it is time for our Big Ten Roundup with Mike de Courcey from BTN and the Sporting News. We'll get his thoughts on Indiana's performances against Illinois and Michigan, and then take a look around the conference. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right.
Later, guys.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
Are you good? Are you good for Thursday night?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And that should be good for Friday too. So I think
okay, excellent. Sweet. See you, man. All right. Let's bring in the great Mike de Courcey. There he is. What's next for Alford? I don't know. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good, Jared. How are you?
Fantastic.
Let me get my earplugs in here, see if they help.
Okay. The hair looks good.
Oh, it's a mess. I had to rush to a meeting and then to this, and bad. Does this help?
There's no change. You might have to select in the Zoom settings under microphone. There might be, it might give you another option to select with those in. Sometimes it picks it up automatically and sometimes it doesn't.
Let's see here. Where is that?
There should be a little microphone with an arrow pointing up. When you click that, and does it say select a microphone?
Ah, there it is. Microphone. Yeah.
How many options does it give you?
It says microphone array and same as system. Those are the only two it gives me.
Well, try microphone array, I suppose.
That's what's checked. So what if I do that? Did that help any?
No, it's the same, but it's okay. It's
all right.
It's good enough to go.
Okay.
It is good enough to go. All right. Man, it feels like it's been a while since we've talked.
I know it has.
It has. Thanks for your flexibility, by the way, since we
had
to switch
easy.
Up the day.
No problem.
So it'll be a little awkward, Banner Monday on Tuesday, but that's what we get for naming the show after a particular day of the week.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right.
Gives you no flexibility. So a lesson for next time.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we will hop right into it here. All right. And here we go. Welcome back to Banner Monday on Tuesday. Each week here in our second segment, we zoom out to get an objective opinion on our Hoosiers and to look at how things are going across the Big Ten Conference. And there is no one better to do that than Mike de Courcey, who covers Big Ten hoops for BTN, in addition to his columns for the Sporting News. Mike, welcome back to Banner Monday here on Tuesday.
Thank you, Jared. Great to be back after our long break.
Yes, it was a long break, but we're back, and the games are coming fast. They're coming furious, and the carnage has already begun here in Big Ten play. So we'll start with Indiana. The Hoosiers went 1-1 last week. What were your biggest takeaways from the win over Illinois and the loss to Michigan?
Well, my biggest takeaway is that the absence of Robert Finney is really punitive, as well as Devontae Green has played. And I don't have any problem with the way he's played. I just think we know now for certain that they're a better basketball team with Robert out there and Devontae playing the role that he's very effective at, being able to play multiple positions, being able to be an energy boost, being able to be a defensive boost in terms of just saying, okay, go get that guy because he's bothering us. I think you lose a lot of that when he has to be your primary point guard, and you lose a sense of definition to your offense that I thought was lacking, especially in Ann Arbor, but also to an extent for a lot of the time in the Illinois game. And what you're also losing is a player who is I think has a better sense of his shot, not of when to shoot, I guess I should say. Devontae's a fine shooter, but I think as a point guard, he's somewhere caught sometimes between, should I shoot this or should I not? Or maybe he's caught between, I know I should shoot this because that's what I've always done, and maybe he shouldn't. And so I think that's been a problem for them. And it certainly was reflected in the loss at Michigan. What I loved about the Michigan game was that was an easy game. Number 2 team, number 3 team in the country, undefeated on the road. You're not playing well. You're way down. It'd be the easiest game in the world to say, let's just take a 25-point loss and get on the bus. And they fought all the way to the end. And I thought that was a really significant statement that they made. And you could sit here and say, oh, moral victory, Indiana has 5 banners, no need to. No, that's not how teams build themselves. I mean, you build yourself by saying, no, we're not getting on that bus with a 25-point loss, even if everybody will say it's okay because they're great and we're developing and we don't have a point guard. We say we're getting on that bus having played the best basketball we can possibly play between now and the end of the buzzer. And I thought that they absolutely did that.
Absolutely. That was what my banner moment was about. So I appreciate you backing me up on that, because it's kind of a tricky subject, and Archie himself, I remember after the Duke game last year when people wanted to claim a moral victory, and Archie was very quick to claim no moral victories. And as a coach, you probably can and should do that. But I think, you make a good point that you have to be able to take those moments of growth within games, even when they're losses, as something meaningful, because they are meaningful.
Well, if you say like you come out and say in the public, no moral victory, all that stuff. But if you're saying to your players that how you perform between when the game is effectively decided and the final buzzer, then what's the point of that whole, I coach every possession to the end, so I'm still coaching the walk-ons just like it matters. I mean, all that stuff is just is empty noise. And I don't believe that coaches really think that. I think they sometimes try to tell reporters that the line about no moral victories because they don't want fans to come back at them and claim that the coach is trying to get away with something when he didn't win. But the reality is that every possession matters, or they wouldn't do that. They would just sit down and, hey guys, go ahead and do whatever for the next 5 minutes. This game's won or this game's lost. And you see coaches work really hard in those times to work on situations if the game is lost. They call timeout and say, okay, remember you're down 20 and what you did to get here. Or you call timeout with 9 minutes left and the game's starting to get away from you and say, hey, don't worry about the scoreboard. Worry about, what you do between now and the next TV timeout. Let's win that. And they do that all the time because that's how you build a team and build a season.
I want to ask you, Mike, about injuries and get your perspective on this, because injuries can be kind of a hard thing to discuss from a fan perspective, because the wins and losses still count and they still matter, even as you have injured players. So you don't want to make excuses. And yet injuries can also be a legitimate explanation for why a team isn't playing as good as might otherwise be expected. So how do you assess the impact of injuries when you're analyzing team performance?
I think the first thing you have to do is differentiate between two kinds of injuries. There are the long-term, they're not coming back injuries. Udoka Azubuike this year, what happened with him being unavailable to play the rest of the year is, okay, we got to be different now, or we got to be this team now. And okay, what do we do to try to get over this? Or you have what Indiana has gone throughout this year, which is, okay, we got to get through this game because that guy's not playing and we have to do these things without him, or we have these multiple guys without him. But when you have those kinds of injuries, you not only have to survive the near term, what do we do to get by without him? But then you have the residual effect of what you're not getting better at while those players or player are absent. I mean, Zach McRoberts is only beginning. I think in the Illinois game was the first time I saw Zach McRoberts play this year. I've seen the guy wearing his number, but he hasn't been himself until that game. And so there's that part of it. And then there's also the part of it where Robert was really good. Let's say for a freshman point guard, he's playing at an A- level when he gets hurt. And he may come back and play at the same A- level when he returns. Let's hope that's the case. But what you're missing is that, okay, I think he's now missed 3 games. You're supposed to get better in those 3 games. You're not getting better in those 3 games. There may be elements of the game you are getting better at, but as a team, as the ideal Indiana unit, you are not improving because you are not the ideal Indiana unit. So that sets you back a little bit. And it doesn't have to result in wins or losses or the other thing, but it does affect where you stand. Let's say he returns in a game. Well, where you stand on that day, and then maybe where you stand at the end of January, that you might have been, a half a lap farther ahead than you are. And can you then make up that half a lap while you're also making the progress that you're supposed to make between February 1st and February 15th? It's all a very complicated equation. And I think most fans, and I've been guilty of this myself in my time as a fan, is you just think, okay, they're back. And so now we're good again. Now everything's fine. And in fact, it's not that simple. It can be dealt with and it can be covered, but it does complicate the coach's season and complicates the team's season as they try to get to where you want them to go.
One other question for you about Indiana before we move on. The big issue for Indiana so far this season has been slow starts. We saw it against Michigan. We saw it in other games, just those teams weren't as good as Michigan to be able to just blitz them right off the bat. When you see a team that has an issue like that is so persistent, is that something that you think that they can correct, or is that just part of this team's DNA? Or, like, do you have maybe any examples, I guess, from the past of a team that had an issue like that and was able to correct it, midway through the season?
Well, I think all teams can adjust themselves. And I think the first thing you have to look at when you are getting off to slow starts on a consistent basis is, are you starting the right guys? It may seem like that they are the 5 players who would logically be the right unit, but are you starting slowly in the second half as well? Because, one of the things I always say when people say it doesn't matter who starts, I say, well, okay, here's the deal. Almost every coach in almost every situation starts the same 5 guys at, not necessarily game to game, but if he starts these 5 players at the beginning of the game, he starts the same 5 players at the start of the second half, which means that he's effectively playing the same players together for 10 minutes of the game. That's a quarter of the game. If you're going to tell me it doesn't matter how those guys play together, you're kidding yourself. So I would then say, okay, if you're getting off to a bad start in those first 5 minutes, are you also getting off to a bad start in the first 5 minutes of the second half on a consistent basis? If you're not, then it's an attitude thing. If it's not a technical, chemical thing between your players, then it's how do you warm up? How do you get ready? How does your point guard say, okay, we set the tone, all those sorts of things. And I think that has to be solved through emphasis. We cannot continue to fall behind or play poorly in those first 5 minutes of every game just because that's what we do. Because again, those 5 minutes are 1/8 of the game. And so if you're going to be consistently bad in 1/8 of the game, that's going to be a problem for you. That's a big chunk of the time that you play.
And Indiana, definitely a team that they start the same guys first half, second half, but we've been awesome at the start of second halves. And Archie even said, it's a toughness thing. So I think he has a handle on the problem. Now it'll just be, if they can address it and fix it and make it better. All right, let's step back. Let's take a look around the Big Ten. We'll start with power rankings. What is your current top 4? I believe the last time we spoke, Indiana was in it. I believe the Hoosiers were 4th. Are the Hoosiers still in it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Number 1 has not changed, will not change. I suppose it might some point, but there's no reason to now. Michigan is playing fantastic basketball still. We saw that on Sunday against the Hoosiers. Jordan Poole is becoming just a phenomenal Big Ten player. I think that Xavier Simpson's been wonderful. And I thought Charles Matthews on Sunday played as well as he's played this season. So they continue to escalate as a team, and there's going to be a time when they drop a game and everybody's going to go, hey, what happened, and start to worry. But they're going to be dynamite from now until the end of the year. Number 2, easy, Michigan State, also playing without a key player, Joshua Langford, but covering for him very well. This is like Arn's dream season, because on one hand you get Matt McQuaid hurt, and then you get Joshua Langford hurt, and then you're a starter for half the year. I'm sure he doesn't want his guys to get hurt, but it's worked out great for him. And he's an interesting player to me because I saw him play in high school, in AAU, whatever, at the Peach Jam as an under, I guess the second then is like 16 and under is the second division at the Peach Jam. And I happened to be talking to a coach, and so stayed seated. I don't always watch the 16s because you only get so many breaks in those tournaments. And I watched him play, and he was a summer teammate of Kennard, Luke Kennard, who went to Duke and is now in the NBA. And I thought he was a really nice player. I wondered if Michigan State was the right place for him because I didn't know if he was quite dynamic enough. And he's a guy who sat there for 3 years, barely played, and now is getting to be a high-level contributor on a team that is starting to believe it can make the Final Four. So, big ups to him for not just saying, okay, I'm getting out of here because I'm not playing, because he's now a really important player for the Spartans. IU holding at number 3. I'm not going to hold that game against them. The loss to Michigan. Everybody in the league is going to lose that game, with the possible exception of Michigan State. And maybe Ohio State, because they tend to do well up there. But I'm not sure if either one of them goes. I'm pretty sure Michigan State goes into Ann Arbor. I'm not sure if the Buckeyes do. But most of the teams that play there are going to lose there. So not a bad loss. And you're playing it as well without your point guard. So they're staying at number 3. And then I'm going to slide Minnesota in at number 4. They're still only 2-1 in the Big Ten. But they've got the best road, as good a road win as anybody has. Michigan State's got Ohio State, and they've got now Wisconsin. They really did a number on Wisconsin. Wisconsin, they took the Badgers out of everything they wanted to do. And so, plus they have the home win against Nebraska. So they only have 2 wins, but those are stout wins that the Gophers have. So I'm going to put them in at number 2 at this point.
After watching, obviously, the Michigan IU game and the Michigan State-Ohio State game, I think the individual matchup I'm most looking forward to in the conference this year is Cassius Winston against Xavier Simpson. I think that is going to be so much fun to watch. Are there any one-on-one matchups like that? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of them that you're looking forward to, but do any kind of stand out now that you've seen, about 40% of the season?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go with you, agree with you on that, for the reason that you're talking about the best offensive point guard in the country and the best defensive point guard in the country. So that's a great combination, right? Cash on the offensive side and Xavier on the defensive side.
Plus, I could watch those hook shots all day long, just not against Indiana, but they're awesome.
Yes, they are amazing, and Cash will have a hard time defending against those, because it's he's not an elite defender to begin with, and that's a tricky shot to have to deal with. I would say that one of the matchups that I'm really interested in seeing is Jalen Smith against the front line from Minnesota, because they're so big and long, and they have so much dynamism at Minnesota. And I don't know which player they choose to defend Jalen with, but they've got a lot of options there. Curry maybe, and I think that's a really interesting matchup for Smith, who is developing. When I was looking at this the other day, developing into a really impressive player. And I don't think that the scouts or the mock draft people are catching on to how talented he is. He was not, as big a name coming into this year as some freshmen are, but he's playing at a really high level and shooting the basketball. Look, he is someone that you would not call a shooter, but he's also not someone you would call a non-shooter. So I think he has a chance to be a good shooter of the basketball from the perimeter. And when he adds that to his game, he's going to be really special.
He's 6'10", right? Is he
right.
That tall? So
that's what they list. I have not been in the gym with him, so I couldn't gauge that, but that's what they list.
So he's obviously Indiana plays Maryland on Friday. We're going to talk about that here coming up in the show. One of the unsung stories from the Michigan game, I thought, was Justin Smith's terrific defense on Ignas Brasdeikis, and he's been playing great defense for about a month now. I would assume Justin will draw the assignment of Jalen Smith, at least when the starters are out there, because Juwan is going to have to be on Bruno Fernando. I would imagine that's how they'll go. How do you see, that particular matchup of Justin and Jalen, and just that matchup of overall Justin and Juwan against Maryland's front court?
I think it's really interesting because Justin Smith, there are moments when you see him do dynamic things and you think, boy, I wish I could see more of those. But what he's done in the interim, while you're waiting for that next big moment, is he's quietly using that dynamism to just wreck everybody. And I love that, because that's what I've been waiting for with him. You're wanting him to, you look at him and you watch him and you say, that guy has to be one of the best defenders in this league. And there's no excuse for him not to be. And now he's becoming that. So it's really exciting to see. It's a real challenge for him if that's the assignment he draws, because he does give up some size. But his athleticism, his dynamism is a weapon against someone like Jalen Smith. He's going to have to be conscious of Smith's ability to get close to the rim and to use his length. And he's going to have to be able to hold up against that physically, not get worn down and not allow himself to get back down. But I think it's a really interesting matchup. Brasdeikis is right in his wheelhouse in terms of size and skill set. So If he's going to lock somebody up, that's somebody that you wouldn't be surprised by. But Smith is a much different sort of challenge for him. I'm really excited about seeing that matchup.
How does he compare to Lamar Stevens? Because Justin did a good job on Stevens. I think Jalen Smith's about 3 inches taller than Lamar Stevens, isn't he?
That's the same as Iggy. Iggy's 6'7" so again, right, like I said, right in Justin's physical wheelhouse. Jalen is taller, longer, handles the basketball really well, knows how to use his body and his handle to back you down, and knows how to use his length once he catches close to finish over you. And so that's the challenge for Justin, is to not get, to try to stay in front of Jalen as much as he can without giving up too much backside. But those are all the challenges they're going to have to go through once they get to game planning for that game. But it's a great challenge for him, because down the road, if he can do this job, we know now he can defend wings, and we know he can defend stretch fours that are his size. But if he can do this as well, there's a good chance when they get to March, they face somebody who has that kind of length or skill set, maybe not identical, but similar. And you take some comfort from knowing that you've dealt with that matchup before.
You talked a little bit about Minnesota. They obviously had a big win. What other teams, what other players caught your eye here the first week back in Big Ten play?
Well, I thought even though Northwestern did not play well, I thought that they got a lot of really good play out of Gaines. He was a plus 18 in that game, and they were not good enough to be plus in anything. I mean, their shot selection was really poor. Even on the game-winning sequence, they take a shot that wasn't a well-advised shot. It gets batted around. Great play by Vic Law to retrieve it to knock it loose, and then I believe Pardon picks it up and fires it back out, and Turner knocks it in. So they did not execute well shot selection-wise. But in the second half, they shot the basketball really well, and Gaines was at the heart of that. I thought that was enormous for them. Wisconsin, Brad Davison is starting to play basketball the way he's capable of. They as a team did not have a great game in the Minnesota game, but they came back really well in the Penn State game. And Davison is starting to shoot the basketball at a high level again. And a year ago, he was a pretty good shooter for a guy who was playing with one shoulder. And so one expected that he would come into this year and start draining shots. But coming off the basketball, with Trice coming back in, really kind of fiddled with his comfort and his confidence. And he's starting to get that back. And he executed a bounce pass. He drove the right baseline and executed a bounce pass through the lane past 3 defenders out to Trice for Trice's only 3 on Sunday. That if you see it, I tweeted it out yesterday. If you see it, it's going to be the most underrated play of the college basketball season, because the English he puts on that ball so that it hits Trice right in the shooting pocket. I'm telling you, it's not a normal play. And so those guys really did a nice job to catch my eye this weekend.
That was a beautiful pass. It was awesome. Yeah, I saw it. It was great. So obviously Indiana, Maryland, a big game on Friday. What other games coming up this week should everybody have their eye on? I think Michigan State plays Purdue, don't they?
Yeah, that's actually this evening. They play Purdue. So that's a big game that I would definitely look forward to in the conference. And that is, I think that what we're looking at as well in the conference coming up over the weekend, you're looking at some really interesting games. I would say that the Sunday game involving Michigan and Northwestern. Again, can Northwestern follow up what they did this past weekend by squeezing out a win, by starting to perform at the level that they did when they came to Bloomington? We have not seen them play as well, perhaps, in any game as they had in that game. They have not been as sharp as they were since then. And then I think Saturday, the game between Ohio State and Iowa, I'm very much looking forward to that. Iowa is one of those teams, they got to that top 25 ranking. I think they're somewhat a prisoner of that expectation level now. And so they've got to start to perform to that. Sunday they did. They got a big win over the weekend, and that was important. But they need to follow that up by continuing with their success at home against Ohio State.
And last question for you, Mike. We had a few people brought this up in the chat, so it would be great to get your thoughts on it. Pat Chambers obviously had a moment in their most recent game. For those who didn't see it, it was in a timeout. They have a freshman, Miles Dredd, a guard. I don't remember who they were playing, but they were losing, not playing particularly well. He, kind of jawing at Miles Dredd and pushed him. Obviously, this drew, he apologized for it. He got suspended for a game. Tom Izzo has come out, and I thought made some really interesting comments about it. And it was nice to see a coach like Tom Izzo at least be as candid about it. Brendan Quinn wrote that piece on The Athletic, if you want to read it. But what were your thoughts on that whole situation?
My thoughts, first of all, were the first thing that bothered me about it was its sort of absence of true spontaneity. I mean, he was not involved in a conversation with those players at that point. Those players were huddling as a team, as a player group, and he broke into that huddle and then challenged Dredd in the way that he did. So I didn't think that was appropriate from that standpoint. I covered Memphis I think it was a 1994-95 season. And the late Larry Finch, a dear man who unfortunately left us earlier part of the decade, was coaching then. And he did a very similar thing to David Vaughn, who was one of Memphis' star players then, played a little bit in the NBA. But David, first of all, was his nephew. So I think that differentiated a little bit. And the second thing that to me differentiated was that they were in a huddle. He was having a dialogue or a monologue with his players, and went to that. It was an almost identical circumstance. The action, almost identical action. And so from that standpoint, I thought there was a differentiation there. It seemed more spontaneous when Larry did it back in the day. The second thing I would say is that it is a coach's job to manage pressure. The pressure that is affecting Patrick Chambers right now is different than the pressure that affects Tom Izzo from night to night. Tom Izzo's pressure is mostly self-induced. He has a standard that he believes that he should reach, and that his job is to lift his players to reach the standard that he believes they should meet. That's the pressure that he applies to himself. But he's wealthy enough that he never works again. He'll be fine. He's at an age where if he didn't coach again, retirement would not be out of sorts. So it's a different pressure for him. Patrick Chambers has not made the NCAA tournament yet as a head basketball coach. And they came into this year with some veteran players that were talented enough that although the backcourt was entirely new, there was an expectation that they might perform at a level where they could at least contend for that. It hasn't worked out that way to this point. Now, they could get on a roll and win a bunch of Big Ten games. And if you win Big Ten games this year, they mean something. Mm-hmm. It has not been to that level this point. So the pressure on him is different. And how you manage that pressure says a lot about you. And I think also you're in a circumstance where, like I said, the pressure is to do enough to continue on. And you don't want to give people anything to distract from what your performance is. And by doing that, he gave people who already are predisposed to say his performance is not to the standard that they wish, to say there's one more thing that they may not care for about him. So I think from that point, you have to factor in a lot of elements when judging what happened. And I thought that it was reasonable for him. I thought it was laudable for him to come in after the game and say, I was wrong. What I did was wrong. I apologize to Miles Dredd. That was laudable. But I also don't think it was inappropriate for his boss to say, I have to set a standard for my coaches, my head coaches and my assistants in all sports, lacrosse, soccer, wrestling, whatever it is. Not sure if Penn State has a lacrosse team. I might be wrong there. Volleyball, I know they have that. Everybody has to have a certain standard that they have to meet, and this does not meet the standard that I hold as athletic director. I think that's a reasonable position for Sandy Barber to take. I had no problem with her action at all. I doubt that Patrick Chambers was exceptionally surprised when he got the note or call or in person, however it went down, that was going to be how it was managed. If it had been longer than one game, that would have been really excessive. One game was plenty. The message was sent to both Patrick and everyone else that coaches there that that's not how you do business.
Yep. Well, Mike, we kept you a little bit longer than normal this week, so thank you for being so generous with your time, and we always appreciate your insights here on Banner Monday.
Delighted to do it, Jared, on Tuesday.
Yes. Next week, we'll be back on Monday. All righty. So coming up, it is time for Basketball 201. Ben Ladner will be here to talk about Indiana's performance against Michigan, some of the things they didn't do well early, how they adjusted and got better later in the game. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Thanks, Mike. That was great.
Well, you bet, Jared. I'm sorry that this isn't working out. I'm not sure why. I apologize.
You know what, though? It sounds good enough. So
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. It sounds good.
Okay.
All righty. Well, thank you, Mike. We'll talk next week. Yep.
Enjoy.
Thank you. All right. So obviously we already did Basketball 201 with Ben, but I had to gotta chop this up. So for the folks watching on YouTube, the Basketball 201 video in its own video, and then we'll eventually be doing those on Tuesday by themselves. But to make the transitions go right, we had to do it this way. So let's talk a little IU Maryland, shall we? I've got some thoughts on this game. And if you have thoughts in the chat, let me know. This is our time. It's just me, so we can talk a little bit more in the chat here. Okay, let's hop right into this. I'm going to try not to go too long at this segment. Famous last words. Welcome back to the Assembly Call, Banner Monday on Tuesday. Each week in our final segment, we dedicate it to preview Indiana's upcoming opponent for that week. And this week, we got a long time to wait. Indiana plays Sunday, a nice long layoff until Friday, which hopefully is a layoff coming at the right time. Deron Davis obviously, warmed up but couldn't play against Michigan. Hopefully we get him back, because goodness gracious, could we use him in this matchup? Hopefully, with a little extra time, Rob Phinisee is ready to come back. Jake Forrester as well, because obviously we're getting pretty deep in the bench there, so we need all hands on deck. So hopefully that is one of the benefits that comes out of this long break. But they play Friday. The game is at 5:30. I think it's on Fox or FS1. So it's a little bit of an early start. Pretty nice for folks who host post-game shows. That'll be nice. Bob asked, any update on the injured guys? No update yet. I would anticipate one on Thursday when Archie does his media availability. I don't think we'll hear anything before then, other than message board rumors. But let's talk about IU Maryland. So coming into this game, Indiana's number 27 in KenPom. Maryland is number 28. So obviously very close from the computer perspective. KenPom gives Indiana a 38% chance to win and predicts a 74-70 victory for Maryland. If you look at the history, obviously not a long history between these teams, and we're not going to go very far back in the history. We will keep it just to games since Maryland joined the Big Ten, because other previous games are too painful to discuss, and I won't do it. Obviously, last year, Indiana beat Maryland at home, 71-68. That was that game where Juwan got injured in the Michigan State game. We weren't sure if he'd be able to come back. He puts up 25 points. I think he had 4 boards, 4 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He was awesome, and we won a close game late. However, and we've beaten Maryland every time they've come to Simon Scott Assembly Hall. However, we have lost to Maryland every time it hasn't been a home game. So in 2017, we lost 75-72. That was that game where OG had that ridiculous dunk. I think he got hurt the next game against Penn State. In 2015, we lost 68-66. That was the game where I think Yogi shot, rimmed out right at the end. And then in the rematch in the Big Ten tournament that year, we lost 75-69. So games against Maryland are typically very close. At least, when we're playing them there, we blew them out a couple times at home. But when we play them there, it's typically very close. I expect that will be the same this year. Maryland is 12-3. They are 3-1 or 4-1 in the conference so far. You look at their wins. They have wins over number 61 Penn State, number 68 Loyola, and number 16 Nebraska. That game against Nebraska, obviously, their biggest win of the season, that came at home. They have lost to number 2 Virginia at home. They've lost to number 17 Purdue, and then they've lost to number 49 Seton Hall at home. So they have lost twice at home. So they are not unbeatable in their home venue, although, can't really compare Indiana to Virginia, but Seton Hall, the number 49 team in KenPom, Indiana ranked higher than them. One of the defining traits of this Maryland team is that they are very young. They are 349th in the country in experience. They are one of the youngest teams in the country. Anthony Cowan, obviously, is a junior who has played a lot of minutes. Bruno Fernando is a sophomore, but then they start 3 other freshmen. Jalen Smith, who Mike de Courcey talked about. Eric Ayala is another one. And then Wiggins is the other guy's name. And then the next 2 guys off their bench are a sophomore and a freshman. So, they are very, very young. In terms of their profile, their offense is currently ranked 28th in the country. In some ways, they're similar to Indiana because they have a lot of success on twos. They have a very high 2-point field goal percentage, thanks in large part to Bruno Fernando and Jalen Smith. They don't take a ton of threes, and they turn it over a decent amount, which you would expect from a young team. They turn it over almost 20% of the time. That's 203rd in the country. The big difference between Maryland and Indiana offensively is they offensive rebound like crazy. They get 37.2% of their shots. They get them as rebounds. That's 15th in the country. Indiana, obviously not a team that really focuses on offensive rebounding, but it's a big part of what Maryland does. Offensively, they run things through Anthony Cowan and Bruno Fernando. Anthony Cowan plays almost 85% of minutes. He's a guy, a role similar to, what a Yogi had for Indiana. He's really the guy that kind of makes things go. He's got an assist rate of about 24%. Don't get me wrong, he's not as good as Yogi, but that's just kind of the role. He takes a lot of threes. He's taken 91 threes this year, only making them at about 34%. And when we get to the keys in the game, making him a jump shooter is going to be important for Indiana. You can't just let him probe the defense and get inside, because what happens if he does that is you've got Bruno Fernando and Jalen Smith as cutters, and that's been one of their most effective sources of offense, according to Synergy Sports. Fernando is a guy who's really come into his own as a sophomore. He's a big guy who's able to play 70% of minutes because he doesn't foul a ton. He only commits 4.2 fouls per 40 minutes, which is a really good rate for a big man playing that many minutes. He draws a lot of fouls. He draws 5.6 per 40. So this is going to be a big challenge for Indiana because you're going to have to put Juwan Morgan on him, and Juwan is going to have to do a good job of trying to beat him to spots, not let him get position, try to use his quickness to his advantage, but not foul when Fernando gets position. Bruno Fernando is probably going to get 6 or 7 point-blank buckets just because he gets position and we can't foul him, and we don't necessarily have a big man outside of Deron Davis who can challenge him at the rim. So we're going to have to live with that, and then obviously you hope that on the other end, Juwan is able to pull Bruno away from the basket, make some threes, and then also go down low, and like he did against Teskey, who is a taller guy, beat him with his guile, beat him with his quickness, which Juwan can really do. But that's going to be a really interesting matchup in this game. Fernando, like Juwan, he's almost 70% on his 2-point field goals. He shoots well from the line and draws fouls, so you don't want to give him too many opportunities from the line, and he's an outstanding rebounder. We talked a little bit about Cowan. Jalen Smith, a guy who's playing about 60% of minutes. He's good on twos. He's a good rebounder, just a solid player for a freshman who can occasionally be great. And so that's going to be a big challenge for Justin Smith. And then Ayala and Wiggins, a couple of wings. They're 6'5", 6'6". They're both really good three-point shooters. So I would expect one of those guys to guard Romeo and Romeo to guard one of those guys. It's going to be important for Indiana to not give them too many good, clean looks on the offensive end. Defensively, they are ranked 45th overall. It's interesting, they're only 45th, but you kind of look at their KenPom profile, and there's really nothing that jumps out as a big weakness except for the fact that they don't force turnovers. But they're a good rebounding team. They block shots. They don't really put opponents on the line. They defend twos pretty well. So they don't have any obvious deficiencies on defense except for this. They're not very good in transition. So they give up, and again, this is something that you would expect from a young team, but they give up 1.05 points per possession in transition, which is in the 28th percentile nationally. In the half court, they're really pretty good. I think they're in the 80th or 85th percentile, somewhere around there. So they're a really good team defensively in the half court. So for Indiana, it's going to be really important to try to get some easy buckets in transition. The issue there, of course, is Indiana is not good in transition offensively. We're 22nd, 23rd percentile. We really aren't good. And Rob Phinnessy has been one of our best players this year in terms of leading breaks and leading to conversions. Him being back would be huge for a number of reasons, but having his ability in transition, where I think that's going to be really important, especially on the road, to get big buckets, Yeah, and as Bob says, giving up transition points makes sense if they're focused on offensive rebounds. Absolutely. That's the counter, is if they're going to attack you on the offensive glass, then when you get a rebound, you got to be able to go the other way and turn it into points. So hopefully Indiana can do that, get the ball into Romeo's hands. If it's in Devontae or Al's hands, they've got to make better decisions, get the ball into the middle of the court, let the other guys fill the lanes around them. That's going to be really big. So, I think to win this game, Indiana's going to have to be better in transition. That's just not something that we've seen them do a lot of. If we want to talk about common threads in losses, you look at the 3 games Maryland has lost. One common thread is that Bruno Fernando really didn't go off in any of those losses. He averaged 14 points and 10 rebounds. So, he's still averaging a double-double, but didn't have a big 20-point game. The damage was kind of minimized, and he only took 11 free throws in those 3 losses. So that's part of it. Give him his buckets. Let him go 6 of 7. Let him go 8 of 9 on twos, but don't give him extra opportunities from the free throw line, and don't get your best players in foul trouble. So just remember that when he gets some easy twos, is that we're going to have to live with some of that. The other common thread is that Anthony Cowan was inefficient as a shooter. He was 6 of 22 on threes in their 3 losses. He was 8 of 20 on twos, and he's a guy who does seem to, settle for jump shots. Even though you look at his synergy profile and he's so good at, the pick and roll and doing some of these other things, their most inefficient offense is Anthony Cowan taking jump shots. And maybe that's just because he struggled as a shooter. I haven't watched them enough, and maybe he's a better shooter than what he's showing. But right now, that has been a path to beating Maryland and to getting a stop. It's also going to be important to limit turnovers. It always is on the road. Seton Hall only had 8 turnovers. They won by 4. Virginia only had 2 turnovers. They won by 5. Now, Purdue had 16 turnovers, and they were still able to win. But, 2 out of the 3 games, the opposition really limited turnovers. Indiana did a much better job of that against Michigan. And then I think it's going to be important to make some threes. All of the teams that beat Maryland hit 8 or more three-pointers, which makes some sense. You can get some three-pointers in transition, off of them going for those offensive rebounds. And if you're in the half court and you're facing a good half court team, you really need to maximize the opportunities when you do score, and that means exchanging a few 2-pointers for 3-pointers. Now, Indiana shouldn't go crazy with it. I think the style Indiana plays, where they don't shoot many threes, but they hit a high percentage of the ones they shoot, fits this particular roster. But I did think, Galen made a good point on the recent episode of Crimson Cast, that if Indiana's going to squeeze a little bit more out of this offense, finding a way to get a few more 3-pointers, whether it's running a play for Evan Fitzner, whether it's Romeo, just hitting a higher percentage of his, whether it's Juwan Morgan doing some pick and popping, and then against a guy like Fernando, taking a few more threes instead of going, under the basket, maybe that helps us do that. So I think we're going to need to go in there and make more than 3, 4, 5 3-pointers, which, we haven't. We made 2 against Michigan and 5 against Illinois, or 5 against Michigan and 2 against Illinois. So, we haven't been making a lot of them. I think it's going to be important to win on the road to maybe make a few more of those. And then just in terms of their offensive style, they take a lot of jump shots. 49% of their half-court possessions end up in a jump shot. So, obviously have to challenge those shots, make them be not very clean looks, and hope that they don't have a lights-out shooting day at home. They're pretty solid in transition. For Bruno Fernando, he posts up about 10% of the time, or Maryland runs post-ups on 10% of their possessions. Most of them go to Fernando. He also gets a lot of offense off of cuts, off of offensive rebounds. So it is going to be a big game for Juwan. Maybe you can't keep Fernando from getting that position on the block and scoring, but you can prevent him from getting to the line, and you can put your body into him and box out and prevent him from getting easy putback opportunities. And if you can limit him in those 2 areas, the putbacks and the free throws, now you can limit the impact that he has on the game. And, him going from 14 points to 20 in a close game could be the difference in you winning and losing. And then, with Cowan, as I mentioned before, he shoots a lot. And, as a spot-up shooter, when he's in spot-up situations, 3s or 2s, he's only producing 0.72 points per possession. That's not very good. So you'll live with him taking jump shots. You don't want him getting into the teeth of your defense, breaking things down, getting everybody in rotation, and then being able to find Jalen Smith or Bruno Fernando for easy buckets on cuts, or kicking it out to Eric Ayala or Wiggins for open 3-pointers. So, again, another reason why having Rob Finney back would be huge, but whoever's guarding him, Devontae Green, Al Durham, really need to contain Anthony Cowan. So, to recap, keys to victory: You got to defend Fernando without fouling, especially Juwan, because we can't get him in foul trouble. And then we got to limit Fernando's damage on the offensive glass and at the free throw line. Keep Anthony Cowan out of the lane. Force him to be a jump shooter. He'll take them. He hasn't been very efficient at doing it, but that's going to help you limit the damage Fernando and Smith can make cutting to the basket. And then Indiana's going to have to push it. Get out in transition, convert to get easy baskets on the road. Their transition D, not nearly as good as their half-court D. And the other thing is, Maryland doesn't defend ISOs and cutters particularly well. That's an area where teams have been able to take advantage of their half-court defense. So I think that's a big opportunity for Romeo Langford, who excels in isolation situations, and for Justin Smith, who is very good as a cutter. You're playing against young defenders. They can get lost sometimes. If Justin Smith can be smart about when to cut, and then finish with authority when he gets it, that could help. And then just make some outside shots. It's that simple. It really helps you on the road when you can make some threes, and I think that'll be important for Indiana to do. They're currently averaging 4.25 three-pointers per game in Big Ten play. That's 12th in the conference. We're not going to have a high-volume three-point shooter all year. We know that, but we do have capable guys, So if every game, if you can just get, one from Devontae, one from Al, one from Juwan, one from Romeo, one from Fitz, if they can all hit one apiece, that's 5 already right there. And maybe that will be considered good for this team. And then if you have, 1 or 2 guys who can hit a couple, you can get up to 7 or 8. So Indiana's got to find that balance between not just taking early threes in the shot clock, which they, sometimes do when the shot selection isn't good, but trying to get some three-pointers out of the offense. And if they can do that and they're good looks, then that may help them, again, just squeeze a little bit more out of the offense by being able to hit some more of those higher efficiency shots from three. So, I'll be frank, I don't have a real great feeling about this game. And you should take solace in the fact that I had a good feeling about how we'd play at Michigan. Not that we would win, but just that we would make it a 40-minute game, which obviously we didn't do because of how we came out. So I would love to be proven wrong and that we really bounce back early. But not that we'll get blown out, but I have a hard time seeing us going up there and winning this game because of some of the particular matchup problems that Maryland presents. And just not knowing who's going to be available. I think Deron Davis would be really important in this game to be able to spend at least 10 to 15 minutes guarding Fernando. I think Rob Phinisee would be really huge in this game. And even if they play, they'll be coming off, an injury and not having played that much. And it's going to be a tough environment for them to go in. So it seems much more likely that we lose this game and then come back and get well against Nebraska at home. I think we match up much better against them. And obviously it's at home. But I do think it'll be a close game, and I think if Indiana can maybe make a few more shots than what we've been doing recently, then we can turn a close game into a victory. So, sometimes my feelings are spot on, and sometimes they're way, way, way off. So I just always try and be candid with you about what they are, and I hope to be proven wrong. And chances are by Friday at 5 o'clock, I will have talked myself into why we can win. So you should always probably trust my feeling, 3 days before the game. It's a much more sober, measured feeling than the game day when I'm always talking myself into being positive. So, but that's kind of how I see it right now. Should be a really interesting, fun game to watch, and hopefully the Hoosiers are able to go up there and get it done. Okay, well, that'll do it for us on this week's edition of Banner Monday on Tuesday. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, I hit the wrong song. Gee whiz, hit the wrong closing song. Let's try that again. That will do it for us on this week's edition of Banner Monday. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Monday afternoons, not Tuesdays, for the live broadcast of our Banner Monday recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We'll be back for the IU Maryland postgame show. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. IU Maryland preview. There we go. I did jinx myself. I'm sure I'll be back to being positive. I don't know. Just, this is going to be, it's a tough game, man, with that kind of size that they have. And I'm a little worried about, Cowan being able to take advantage of us early if our defense isn't really on point there. So not a game that we're going to want to start slowing, as none of them are, obviously. But Anyway, I mean, all the games in the Big Ten this year feel like the margins are going to be so small, and it's like, okay, this is going to be a close game. So we will see. It's going to be a fun one. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for dealing with, us kind of switching up the schedule this week and today with Basketball 201. We will again do those on Tuesdays and kind of put them separately in the feeds from here on out. So hopefully that'll make it easier to consume, where it won't be one thing that's so long we can break it up a little bit more. All right, we'll have a new episode of Podcast on the Brink coming out tomorrow, and then Thursday Assembly Call Radio, Friday IU Maryland. So content all the time, every day, because that's what we do as IU basketball fans. Joel, you do have a good point. They are freshmen, but they're going to be freshmen at home, so they're going to be in a little bit more of a comfort zone. The return game in Bloomington, I feel a heck of a lot better. But yeah, jump on them early, and I think that would be big. Jumping on them early just hasn't been a real strength of ours. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to watching and seeing how it plays out and hopefully being wrong. All right, everybody. Talk to you every other day this week.